I'm Chris Monfett, and here's our agenda for today. We're going to do a quick introduction on the VMA, basically a getting started or a how-to of the VMA, go over some authentication, operational tasks, the best practices, and hopefully we'll get to a demo. And I'm a consultant in the legal and financial industry in New York. I've been a VCP2 since 2006, and the other MCSE and all that other stuff. And this is Tim Marami.
Good morning, Tim Renane from Tarmark, systems engineer. Been a VCP since 2007. Been attending VMworld now for, I think it's my 5th year. So
just, this is I'm sure everyone's seen this slide before, the breakdown of what you can buy and can't buy. Just a quick survey. Who has used the VMA before? Okay. Who's running ESXi in production? Okay, good. And ESX Classic? I guess that's the other half. I can do the math. So what is the VMA? Why does the VMA exist? The who, what, when, and why. Everyone knows the console is gone. It's going away. This is the last edition. Hopefully we'll talk about the CAS like we talk about the MUI with a fond remembrance. And we need ways to be able to do things in the command line. There's complex tasks that you need to do or settings that you need to set, troubleshooting and other tasks that you just want to be able to do from a command line. So VMware needs to provide a way. And this is how it fits into the management automation interfaces. And you have the Power CLI, and the VMA is just a pre-built VM that has the SDK for Perl and the vSphere CLI that allows you to do a lot of these things. And there are the other tools. So the VMA has been around for a while. A lot of people don't believe in that. 2008, they first released it, and it was the vMA at the time to go along with the VI everything. And then we changed to the lowercase v, and they obviously changed the name of that. And that was in May 2009, and now there's a 4.1 version of the VMA that just came out that had us change a lot of our presentation in the last 2 weeks. So, ESX Classic, like I said, is the last version. This is ESXi is now the recommended platform from VMware. I've done it in production myself. I like it a lot better. It's a lot, just a lot cleaner. And there's a reason why VMware is doing it. And the VMA obviously has these other, will provide you the CLI and also provide developers tools to do things that were previously done in the console. A little getting started. So just a quick overview of the VMA. It's CentOS now, Linux VM. It's free. Use it, install it a lot of times. Put it, I have a copy in VMware Workstation. It's where I test scripts. I have a virtualized ESX host so I don't break things that are running. It's fully supported by global support services, and the VMTN community is pretty active in creating scripts, and we'll talk about some of the big contributors to that later. There's some pretty low requirements. ESX-3.5 update 2. Hopefully people are beyond that. 512 RAM and 5 gig VMDK. One thing just to be just to remember is that because it does support 3.5, it comes in VMware hardware version 4. So if you're in a vSphere environment, just take a look at that, upgrade it to version 7, just, so you don't get that daily report that tells you have a VM in hardware version 4. So there's, multiple ways you can deploy it. It's very simple. You can download it if you don't have access to the internet from your virtual center box as a zip file and extract it OVF. And then you can also paste the URLs in there to deploy it. It's even quick over the internet. It's only a couple hundred megs. It's very fast. And then once it boots up, it's just like any other, appliance. There's just going to be a couple questions. So you have to enter the host name and IP, and then, I fat finger everything. So there's ways to reconfigure the network settings without redeploying the OVF. So there's 2 different Perl script, and then just another script that will do the same thing and just let you go through the startup wizard again. You'll obviously set the password. It's complex. VMware's, forcing some complex passwords finally on everything. And there's a VI user you can create, and obviously the VMA you can get to it by SSH. And here's the startup screen, just going through. You can figure that out. So you can customize your VMA. There's some things you can change around. There's things you can do. Obviously, VMware's aware everyone's environment's not the same. you can patch the VMA right from the box itself. Simple command, VMA update, kind of like the ESX update command, and you could hit a local repository or go out to the internet. If you are going out to the internet, you have a proxy server. There's a way to pop all that information in with the conf file there. Makes it a lot easier to just do the update when you can just hit the internet. And then also, we're going to talk about this later with logging, but there's ways to add more disk space or add a VMDK for a var log mount point to grow your logs.
Yeah, Chris, just one note on the patching. So for the folks that raise their hand using vMA, I guess you're using 4.0 or maybe 4.1. So if you're running the old vMA 1.0, you're going to have to deploy a new 4.0. But if you're running 4.0, you can just run the VMA update. And actually, if you're familiar with the vMA update, it's just a symlink to VMA update. So patching from 4 to 4.1 is pretty simple.
And here's just a quick screenshot in case you want to see that. That's fun. So time synchronization. Obviously, people want this. If you're going to be using this for logging, you want to have your time the same. You can make yourself crazy trying to figure out matching up the times. The problem is NTP is not set to start on the VMA by default, which is somewhat problematic. So what you need to do is run check config, which is basically, for me, I figured this out, is basically Windows services, and you're setting it to auto start. And it's pretty easy. We'll have a screenshot of what that does. There's maybe 4 options in check config. It's not hard. And the time zone is set to PDT by default. I just set everything to East Coast time because everything revolves around New York. But ESX-i uses UTC. So you want to maybe keep everything in sync. So I would set it to UTC also against my wishes. And there's a command down at the bottom. It's very simple. We're going to show you some screenshots of that now. So there's changing that to UTC, and then also right here is the check config, which is, if you see in the first line, it's set to off on the different levels of startup, and then there it is again to set the auto start. And here's this. This is more Tim's.
Yeah. So on the top of the screenshot there, you'll see that by default ntp.conf file is pointing to ntp.org. So if you have a Stratum 2 server or you want to go to Active Directory or whoever your timekeeper is in your environment, you'd want to edit this file, and then you could just follow the commands on the screenshot to restart NTP so that you're syncing up your time in your environment.
And just here's the getting started summary. We'll go here. Tim's going to take over for authentication.
Yeah, I'll just jump back to that slide real quick. Just to So the VMA, as Chris pointed out, it's definitely a tool in your toolbox. So if you speak to some of the VMware folks, if you've ever opened up a SR or talked to the Genius Bar, the support folks do use command line type syntax to troubleshoot any types of issues in your environment. So one piece of advice would be, if you're not running VCLI on a Windows or Linux box, just have the vMA there for, kind of like an insurance policy if you don't ever plan on using it for logging or anything like that. So it'll be great tool to use in the case of an emergency with support. We're going to touch upon this on the next couple slides, but there is AD authentication with 4.1, as Chris mentioned. When 4.1 came out, we kind of had to redo some of our slides just to show
all of our slides
features.
Complaining about things that weren't available all got ripped out with slides that are now available. So,
and we'll touch upon this, in some of the future slides. But the preferred target is vCenter. So it sounds like, by the show of hands I saw earlier, a lot of people are probably already running vCenter. Also, another feature of the vMA is remote logging. So we'll touch upon that in some future slides. The management piece. So if you have a dedicated machine like Chris mentioned, workstation, I do the same thing. I have a vMA running on my workstation. So if I go to a customer site or I need to troubleshoot something remotely, I have VPN access, I can use my vMA to do things, which we'll touch upon those items later on. And if you're running the VCLI on a Windows or a Linux box and you're having issues, the vMA comes preloaded with all this stuff, and it's managed by VMware, so you don't have to, update your OS and your packages and stuff like that. You just let VMware do that for you. And if you're really dangerous and you want to learn Perl, the whole SDK from VMware is there for vSphere. So, you could pretty much do anything. We'll show some examples of that on the next couple slides. And there's some samples actually on the vMA as well, which we'll use in our demo. So from an authentication piece, this is some of the stuff that's changed in the last couple weeks. There's 3 methods of authentication. One is the interactive logon. So it's no different than firing up RDP or SSH. You have to provide a username and password credentials to get in. This doesn't scale really well, right? In the 4.0 vMA, those passwords are clear text. In 4.1, that's been fixed, and we'll touch upon that later. If you have to use the next one, which is FastPass, we'll talk about how you can secure that a little bit more. But FastPass is another option. So you could pre-configure your interactive logons so that you don't have to type in username and passwords every time you want to connect to an ESX or ESXi host. The last one is Active Directory. So this is something that came out with the Likewise partnership. So you can actually have your VMA connect to Active Directory without having to log on, using the the root account on each ESX box. So the interactive one, which I talked about earlier, is pretty straightforward. The next one is FastPass. So you can connect to any type of target, right? ESX Classic, ESXi, vCenter. These are some of the commands that you would use to add servers, add targets, remove them. There's also a way to add multiple servers. So I think our demo has that. So we have a text file with a bunch of host names in it, and we just run. It's almost like a for loop, and we add all the servers in one command. There's also another feature called rotate passwords. So if you're using the FastPass authentication, the rotating password, how that works is, let's say you have 10 hosts. At midnight every night, those passwords will get rotated. So the coordination happens between the VMA and the ESX host to make sure that the usernames and passwords get changed. So that is an option. And then there's a KB article up on VMware's website. If you're really paranoid and you're afraid that someone could root your VMA and get access to all your passwords, there is a way to secure the file system inside the VMA. And this is probably good for folks that don't have Active Directory. So the AD piece, so now we have this integration, we have this Likewise component, and we can authenticate with vCenter and ESX hosts using AD authentication. I think VMware told us in some of the previous discussions that 80 to 90% of their 100 and something thousand customers are using AD. So this is a nice value add. Logging. So one of the benefits of the VMA is that you can use it as a log collector. So if you're familiar with syslog, syslog-ng, kiwi syslog, if you don't have that in your environment, especially for the ESXi folks who you've probably already found this out, there is no persistent logging in ESXi, so you either have to log to a local data store or use remote logging facilities. So the VMA will provide that option for you. The default settings are listed here. So your rotation set to 5, the maximum number of files is 5 megs, and then the collection period's every 10 seconds. When you do the VI logger, in the ESX Classic environment, you have about 5. I think we have a screenshot. You have 5 different types of logs. VMware took all the VM kernel stuff in ESXi and put it in messages. So you can actually specify which logs you want to log to the VMA. You don't have to log them all. If you just want messages, you can explicitly do that at the command line. On the VMA, you have this directory, varlog VMware, and if you're using host names, you'll see the host name there, and then all the logs underneath there. If you're using IP addresses, you'll of course see the IP address and the host, the logs underneath that. The one thing to note, if you're using ESX Virtual Center with ESXi, I think it's ESX Classic too. No, it's just ESXi. The VXPA logs don't go to the VMA, so you'll want to edit. There's a KB article, and you'll want to edit a configuration file to make sure that happens. So here's a screenshot, as I said earlier. On the top here, you have your logs from ESX Classic, and the bottom you have your logs from ESXi. So a little bit different if you haven't moved over yet to ESXi. So if you're looking for something like VM kernel related, it would be in the messages file on ESXi. Operational. Okay, so what's the use case for some of this stuff other than the authentication and the vCLI and the logging? If you're doing things in the classic environment that you want to keep doing, there is an option for you, and the vMA will provide that. So if you're doing some kind of setup, some type of maintenance task, like Chris mentioned, you have a daily report that goes out and looks at all your hardware virtual 7, or hardware virtual machines that are running virtual machines that are running hardware virtual 4. You could do that type of stuff, with the vMA. Administrative tasks, looking at performance issues. We'll talk about that later. So the vMA does add a lot of value if you're still kind of tied to the console OS and need a shell. Yep. Do you want to switch over?
Okay, so there's a lot of operational tasks, and I had moved my production environment to ESXi initially, maybe 8 months ago, and one of the things that besides some of the performance things that I know I have to do in setting up a host is configuring your storage and just how things are going to be. I had an active array, and fixed is the default, and that's not what I wanted to use. So how do I get into the command line to make these changes? And the VMA provides the ESX-CLI commands to do these, and then you can see here the different storage commands that you can run. Obviously, refer to your storage vendor's best practices on what you need to set. Not round robin's not available, or Lua, or active is available for every array. And that was one of the big command line settings that had to happen for me. So some of the other things that in host configuration, just in post-install tasks, just going through and just checking the duplex settings on the physical NICs. Just you don't want to start a new host with some type of weird networking issue. I like to blame the networking guys, not me. And one of the other post-install tasks that we're actually going to show a demo of is, in my environment, I had run HPSIM. And I don't want to give the root account to my HPSIM administrator to just pull hardware information. So we created a read-only account, HPSIM RO, that you can use to do that authentication. And you can create a script that will go through and do that on every host instead of manually logging in with the vSphere client, going to users and creating a user, or going to the command line and doing it. You can just have a quick script that will do that for you. If in an iSCSI shop, one of the things that you'll need to do is if you're going to be using jumbo frames, obviously all the way through the environment to the array, you need to set the MTU size on the vSwitch itself, and it has to be done at the command line as a 4.1. You can set the VI logger. So it's part of basically a post-install task, or maybe you're not doing that now and you want to go through and do it. You can do that all from the VMA. And then you can also, as we talked before, customize different management services like NTP, SNMP, and DNS. And then these are all the commands, ESX config and VI config, that are available with the VMA. And one of the new ones that you'll see there, I don't know if you're not using 4.1, is the VI config host ops, which previously wasn't there. And that's maintenance mode. You can put hosts in and out of maintenance mode, which is very nice to have available in the VMA. If you have a script that's doing something post-install, automatically just put it in maintenance mode. You can't do anything to hurt anything if you have it in maintenance mode. I kind of like just to have everything when I'm doing the scripts to run that way. Part of the really nice thing of the VMA is that the community, especially the guys who are Perl scripters, have really adopted the VMA environment and the SDK for Perl. One of the big ones is William Lamb. I don't know if you've been to his website, but virtuallyghetto.com. His scripts I don't even know if they're scripts, they're almost programs. They're phenomenal. I can't say, he puts this all out there for free. It's great. The first one is, he took the security hardening guide and took every setting in it and checks for it with a Perl script. And if you've seen the security hardening guide, it's 75, 80 pages, something like that, of settings on the host and the VM level virtual center. And his script can go through each section individually, all the sections at once, and produces a nice report that we'll show a screenshot of next. He also has a health check script, which he's had around since the 3.0 days. It has everything. It just documents host, virtual center, VM inside, the logical disks, space left, NICs, everything that you could possibly think of. And we'll go over a little bit more when we get a screenshot in the next couple slides. And then performance. It's one of the first things I thought of when I was going to ESXi. How am I going to do ESX top? And the VMA allows you to do our ESX top, obviously remote, which allows you to do ESX top the same way you did before and always have done, which when troubleshooting performance problems is the first place that I always go. Just makes everything a lot easier that way. And here's a screenshot of William's health check report, which I would not print out. You will kill a lot of trees. And it's an HTML doc. You can save it. It's got this. You can go to each section. Obviously, this is not as robust. I think this ran on Tim's laptop, so it's probably not as many environments. And as you'll see, Tim's laptop is not that secure. You guys could probably get right into his VMA. And this is just like, I don't even know how to put it into words of how much effort he must have put in and to get this to work. And he's continuously updating these things, and he's extremely active. I think 2 days after 4.1 came out, he had information on the VMA that I think the VMA developers probably didn't have yet. And he's all over it, and he's a very sharp guy. So just a quick summary. Remote server management features for ESX classes and ESXi. That's what the VMA is for. You can do just about everything you need to do operationally through the VMA. And the real nice thing is it's all in one. As you'll start seeing in the community, if you get on there, the VMA community, people are writing scripts, but they're telling you, I'm not running this on the vSphere CLI from my Windows box. I'm doing this in the VMA, so you don't have to worry about dependencies. Everyone's writing the scripts for everything that's prepackaged in one box. So you don't have to start worrying about, I don't have that RPM, I do have this RPM, or other things that you need. And then also, obviously, troubleshooting performance issues is the big one for this. Tim's going to go over some best practices.
So through the course of putting this presentation together and looking at some of the community blogs and things like that over the past couple, 6 to 12 months, we put together some best practices just as takeaways. So VMware has fully tested using the VMA with the logging facility up to about 100 hosts. So we've had some questions. We did this session on Monday. What do I do? I got a couple hundred hosts. So there may be some architecture that needs to go into your design if you're going to use the VMA. Maybe do it by cluster, by data center, things like that. You definitely want to put the VMA on your management LAN, right? So your whatever's your service console, your DCUI, your virtual center box, whatever network that is, that's where the VMA should be. Definitely use a static IP address, fully qualified domain name. I mean, if you're using Active Directory, you definitely need to have the DNS setting, DNS domain name correct. I think I mentioned this earlier. For the folks that raise their hand that were using ESX Classic, in ESXi, there is the logs aren't persistent. So you're either going to need to log them locally and or send them to a remote logging facility. If you don't have the remote logging facility, you can use the VMA to do that. And Chris touched upon this earlier, is if you're trying to do some type of event correlation, if you're doing the remote syslog, you want to make sure that the timestamps are consistent between the VMA and your ESXi hosts, which are all UTC now. And VMware recommends that you do use the VMA to connect to vCLI. So if you make an analogy to the vSphere client, you wouldn't directly connect to an ESX host or an ESXi host that's being managed by Virtual Center. So you'd want to do the same thing with the VMA. If you're still running ESX Classic and you're used to using the Service Console for, if you're a NetApp customer and you're using, MBR tools, or, we were having this discussion earlier about, vSCSI stats, which, hopefully there's going to be some progress made there. You definitely want to keep an ESX host around just for that type of stuff. Hopefully everybody's not still running Windows 2003. But if you're still doing P2Vs and you're not on 2008, you just want to keep an ESX Classic host around for that. There's other ways to do it. If you're running NFS, there's other ways to align disk, but just some, food for thought. The way the VMA works, it creates, if you're doing the FastPass, it actually creates a local account on the ESX or ESXi host. So if you look in your authentication area, you'll see like a VI admin and then a sequential number, 0001. There's also a read-only account, which we kind of touched upon, but it's really not necessary now with Active Directory integration, VI user. So if you add a VMA to a host and then add another VMA to a host, it's going to create another account, so 0001. So you just want to be careful on how you set these targets up. So if you're going to be removing a host, there's got to be some type of order of operation. You want to make sure you clean up these accounts. And then we mentioned ESX-Top. So for folks who are familiar with ESX-Top, ESX-Top, it's pretty much the same thing. It doesn't have the replay mode like ESX-Top did. So if you wanted to run a VM support and use ESX-Top to read your data later, maybe it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you cron it and you want to read that data later, see what happened with performance troubleshooting. You can't do that with the ESX-Top. And it's really only, I think there's a timeout. I forget what the setting is, but if you leave ESX-Top running, it'll eventually time out. But you only want to use it for troubleshooting. And then we have a couple demos for you.
So the first demo we're going to do is, this is just going to be a bulk add, which is actually a Perl script that's in the sample section from VMware. And we're going to add 2 hosts as VIFP targets, as FastPass targets. And I just created a small server's text file that just has the IP addresses of the 2 ESX hosts. This is all on my laptop, so it's just 2 ESX hosts. And you just throw this script in here, you point it to the file name, and it will go through and use the same password, obviously. And this will go through and add them as targets. So obviously, if you have 15 or 25 hosts, you don't want to have to manually type each single one, type root, type password. It gets pretty tedious. And it just goes through, and now you have those servers. So when you want to run a command with FastPass, VIFP target, it's almost like jumping in and out of interfaces, like on a Cisco device. So you kind of just VIFP target into that ESX host, and now you're basically at the command line for that host. So we're going to go through and run a command here that's actually going to run on both hosts, but we're going to start on the first one, and the MCLI is multiple command lines. So we're going to run a multiple command line script to obviously point to that same text file, and we're going to set the default PSP and to round robin, and then we're also going to set the SATP to active on both of the hosts. And there's my fat fingering. And that will run through and allow you to do both hosts. And if you're setting up a new cluster, this just saves you a lot of time of having to go through. And now they're both set on both hosts. Eventually. It's a little slow. And there it goes. It's not the VMA that's slow. This is all on one laptop, so it's a. So what we're going to do next is we're going to bulk add users, and I had mentioned this earlier about adding like a read-only account for HP SIM to monitor the hardware, and you could have many other reasons. Now with Active Directory, obviously this may not apply to everyone, but creating a read-only account, even with Active Directory, I'd create my own read-only account that I could get back in if Active Directory is not available. I don't always trust all the Windows guys, and to allow me to get into the host. So this is just, somewhat of a long script or I guess command to put this in. This is right from HP on a document. They documented on their best practices guide on how to create this account. And it's, it's pretty straightforward. And you'll see that it'll get added on all the hosts. And there's my password, so you guys can break in and to my laptop again. And it'll eventually go. So there's the accounts are created on both servers automatically for you, just with that script, which could save you, if you're deploying some HP SIM or some new program that will need local accounts like that, it could save you a lot of time. And then the last one, this is just showing you ESX-Top, which forces you to do interactive login, will not accept FastPass. So you'll see here, it's going to prompt me for a user account and then a password. And, it looks the same. It is the same. You could jump through the different screens, and obviously, I wasn't running any nested VMs to get any statistics, so we're just running the system, the system processes. But you can still see memory screen is the same, and we're going to show you the help screen in a second. It's all there. ESX-Top is, still the same. You're just doing it remotely, which if, you're jumping around to jump through different hosts, I just find it a little bit easier to do it that way. And that's it for the demos.
So just to recap, some of the takeaways here are, if you're not familiar with the VMA, at least start using it. You can run it in a workstation like Chris and I do to stage some scripts and use it when we need it as a tool in the tool belt. If you're running classic scripts today, so if you have the ESX Classic and you're running scripts and you like to do a lot of stuff the command line, you can leverage the VMA to do that, so you can port all your stuff over. We had a screenshot earlier showing ESX config and VI config. So those scripts are definitely there. You can customize the VMA. So we had some good questions after the first session on Monday. I have more than 100 hosts. How do I do that? So there's some architecture that needs to go into this. Maybe you use a VMA logging one cluster, a VMA logging one data center, and then you have multiple data centers, multiple clusters. So there is some, and it's free. You can run as many VMAs as you want. If CentOS is not your standard distro, there are some open source packages available on the VMware website, and you can basically build your own VMA if you want to do that. The one thing I noticed with the VMA is when VMA 4.0 came out, and then the VCLI 4.1 came out, those things were not available yet in VMA 4.0, so that might be one reason why you'd want to build your own. That way, you could update, use the RPMs and update your own VMA, but then, when VMware came out 4.1, it actually included the VCLI for 4.1. I mentioned this really earlier. VMware support will use this. The storage folks don't necessarily use it because they like to get root to the box and do some low-level diagnostics. But the performance team, the networking guys, they like to leverage the VMA. So if you've ever opened up an SR and they ask you if you have ESXi, eventually they'll either use tech support mode or they'll want to use the VMA. So if you already have VCLI running in Linux or Windows, that's fine. But if you just want to put this in your back pocket for a rainy day and just leave it running there in case you ever have to leverage it with VMware support, it'd probably be worthwhile. The other thing is with the new certifications now, so if you're a VCP and you want to go step up and get the next data center administration certification, one of the modules on the exam is actually the VMA. So, and that testing is actually 40 lab type scenarios. So you potentially could get hit with this. I think a lot of people blogged on the beta exam, so you can probably get some information off of that. So if that's your goal, you definitely want to get used to the VMA if you're going to be doing the VCAP DCA. And actually here in Moscone West, there's a lab 23 on the VMA. So
which is all the remote management tools that VMware puts you through the steps.
Yeah, so most of the stuff we covered today, some of these tasks, they're all RESX top, ESX config NICs, seeing duplex settings. We didn't explicitly list those commands, but those are all covered in the lab. And the Active Directory authentication as well. This email address here, I don't know if anybody from VMware's here, but on Monday we had the product manager. If you want to send any feature requests, this email address should work. It might not work today, but it might work next week when you get home. You want to send a request. So we had some good questions at Monday's session about, how do you manage this VMA or VMA, in a larger scale. And so those types of questions. And any features like the NTP thing that Chris and I mentioned earlier, Here's some references. So the VMA documentation is right up there on VMware's website. The communities is a really nice place to go, like any other product from VMware. So William, as Chris mentioned, is on there all the time answering questions about the VMA. The source code, if you're not running CentOS or RHEL types of distros, you can download the source code for the VMA. And the VCLI. So if you're not familiar with the VCLI and you want to get a little bit more familiar with it, here's the URL for that code. There are 2 VMware training classes. I actually had a customer, I think they took the performance class. I don't know if anybody here has already taken it, but I think they use the VMA a lot in the performance class. And then there's also if you haven't looked at it yet, there's a 2-day transition class to ESXi. And then here's the blueprint to the VCAP DCA. So if you're looking to get that certification, I think it's module 8.2, which is the remote management concepts. That's where the VMA and the VCLI and all that stuff is covered. Here's some KB articles. We didn't touch upon, I don't think we touched upon any of these, maybe the syslogging, but, actually we did. The securing the file system, we did. We covered 101.769. But here's a bunch of KB articles if you want to use as reference for later, and folks that download the slides after the presentation. There are some other sessions. Let's see. I guess the transition to ESXi is one that's pretty popular.
Yep.
And the other one would be the iSCSI news configuration. I think they cover the vCLI in there as well, or the ESX-CLI command that Chris showed earlier with the path selection policy and the storage array type plugins. And just like to thank, there's a lot of community members out there, like William and all the other gentlemen here that are listed blogging about the VMA.
They've posted different articles on the VMA that have been extremely helpful, and I think it's starting to get you're going to have to use it. 5.0 is going to come at some point, and there's not going to be a console.
So if you like the command line, you need a shell. Look at some of these folks have blogged about in the past, and hopefully it'll be of some value too. And I'd just like to thank you very much. There is, of course, a survey, online mobile app, so please fill out the survey. And if you have any questions.